And let's continue and probably finish the ninth chapter of The Revenge of the Wizard's Ghost. Johnny and Fergie have entered the crypt in the chapel, and it is kind of spooky. They're both feeling very uncomfortable. The professor said nothing. He strode forward boldly and flashed his light into the yawning black pit. Broad, worn steps stretched away before them. After a brief hesitation, they started down. The flight of stairs began to curve to the left almost immediately, and it turned into a spiral that wound around and around endlessly. The farther down they went, the colder it got, but there was something more than cold here. There was an evil, brooding stillness that weighed on their hearts, filling them with despair. Fergie wanted to say clever, witty things, but they stuck in his throat. The professor just stumped doggedly on, moving his flashlight mechanically back and forth. After many turns and countless steps, they passed under a low arch and came out onto a flat, gravelly surface. A dark, empty space opened up all around them, and the searchlight's beam moved over a forest of white pillars. Fergie gasped, and so did the professor. These pillars did not seem to be hand-hewn. They were more like stalagmites in a cave, and they sparkled like snow. Fergie moved the beam up, and he saw that the pillars widened out at the top and merged with the ceiling, which was made of the same white, glittery stuff as the pillars. "My lord," said the professor in an awestruck voice. He stepped forward, moving his light over the rough floor they were standing on. Glimmering patches of ice lay among the columns. "Byron," he went on in a weary, nervous voice, "there's something very wrong here. This is not a crypt. It's a cave, and—" He paused and stepped forward, wet his finger, and swept it across one of the columns. And to Fergie's amazement, he put the tip of his finger in his mouth. "Ha!" said the professor as he licked his lips. "Exactly as I thought. These are pillars of salt, and that ceiling overhead is a salt dome. We're surrounded by tons and tons of good old sodium chloride. How about that?" Fergie was utterly dumbfounded. Then how come the sign said this was a crypt? What the heck's going on anyway?" "I'd really love to know, my friend," said the professor quietly. As he spoke, his breath spewed out in clouds. It was cold, bitterly cold. "I do know one thing, though," he added, turning to Fergie. "This place has a very evil feel, and if we are smart, we will just turn around and skedaddle as fast as we can." Fergie nodded. He didn't need to be persuaded. Together they started back up the steps. As they climbed, Fergie was amazed at how tired he was getting. Sweat streamed down his face, and he was gasping for breath. "It shouldn't be all this hard," he thought. "It really shouldn't. I'm in pretty good shape. Maybe it's the air or something." Fergie stopped. He had to, or he was going to collapse. "How are you doing?" Gasped the professor as he struggled on the step that Fergie was standing on. "Don't even ask," muttered Fergie. He set down the tool bag and wiped his face with his sleeve. "How much farther is it, anyway?" The professor shrugged. "Your guess is as good as mine. I think we must be almost there. I mean, we really didn't come down that many." The professor's voice died away, and he looked at his flashlight. To his horror, he saw that the light was slowly fading, the bright glare dwindling to a yellow pinpoint. Fergie's light was going out, too. They stood dead still in the darkness. Suddenly they heard a rushing, booming sound that came from far above. The sound grew steadily louder. It was like a violent wind roaring through the staircase tunnel. Something hurtled past Fergie and the professor, flinging them against the tunnel wall. Fergie's searchlight flew out of his hands and clattered against the rough stone. The tool bag and the professor's flashlight went rolling noisily along with it. The booming sound faded into the distance and was gone. Then silence fell, and two figures lay still on the cold steps. And that is the end of Chapter 9.